We're continuing through the letter to the Ephesians. Finished chapter 3 last week, and now we're on to the beginning of chapter 4. One of the first things that Paul says after moving from that prayer for the leaders of the congregation to sort of exhortation or instruction to the whole church, he encourages the congregation to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Now, when I first read that, it reminded me of something I read a couple of months ago. It was actually a commencement address for Wellesley High School in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and David McCullough, a senior English professor there in Massachusetts. Anyway, he made this commencement address that went viral primarily because one of the things that he said to the graduating class was, "None of you is special." Yeah. Oh. In the sense that, as he went on to explain, that though they seemed to believe that the whole world was watching them that night, there were millions of other high school students graduating, if not at the same hour, during the same season. And thousands of valedictorians and salutatorians and hundreds of thousands of honor students, all graduating just in this country in one season. But what grabbed me more about what he said during the course of his address was this statement that he made to the class to challenge them. He said, "Be worthy of your advantages." Now, in the academic field, in the cultural and social field, we might assume that he was speaking about education and birth and possessions and power and influence, and surely he was. And that plays a part of the picture. But what Paul is writing about, as he talks about the calling that we have received, to which we must be worthy, he is speaking about something even greater than that. He is talking about gospel. He is even talking about grace. And we're going to examine that in a little more detail in a few minutes. So then immediately goes right into this long litany, what you might call the grocery list for those who have received grace. All of these things are a call to unity and maturity. Look at the words there: humble and gentle and patient and bearing with one another in love and unity of the Spirit and peace. And the common theme there, what he brings them all back together in the next few verses, is this idea of unity, because he repeats over and over, there is one. And that is what we are called to. There is one body, one Spirit, one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, indeed, one God. All of those things are the unity out of which all the rest of this comes. And then he says in verse 7, all of you have grace as Christ has apportioned it to you, as it has been measured out to you. So, what do you think is the portion or the measure of grace? If the book of Ephesians and everything else that Paul writes and all of Scripture itself and all that Jesus taught tells us the answer to that, the answer is abundance. Overflowing is the term that is often used. And so this grace that has been portioned out has been poured out. Not as if we each get a little portion, but we each get an overflowing abundance. So now perhaps this churchy word, grace, that we throw around all the time, might need to be examined a little bit to say, what does it really mean? I mean, other than that great song that we love, a version of which we sang this morning, what does grace really mean? It is the gift, not just a gift, and the gift from God, most assuredly. It is an acceptance that comes before transformation, very different from many other gifts. It is the acceptance that comes before we are transformed into what God created us to be. It is manna-like. That is, it shows up and we know not what it is. The word manna from the Exodus story of the Hebrews in the wilderness literally means, what's this stuff? So grace in some ways is very manna-like. It shows up when we need it most. It is also a principle that functions according to God's math, not the kind of math you need to get out of high school. It is the math that is countercultural, counterintuitive, the math that says that the more you give, the more you have. It is not a transactional commodity. So much of what we have in this world is a transactional commodity. It's based on the law of supply and demand. If I have something that's worth more than what I want, I can get it and get what I want and maybe get a little change back. But grace is a transformational gift. It is in some ways the opposite of a transactional commodity. It works like this. We recognize when grace has been revealed to us that God accepts us. God accepts you. And that gives you and I the ability to accept ourselves. That's how it works. It doesn't start by accepting ourselves. It starts by accepting that God has accepted us. And it doesn't stop with being accepted by God or even accepting ourselves. It goes forward. Like the manna that must be used or it will spoil, grace moves us to accept others. That is the process of this transformational gift. It goes from God accepts you, you accept yourself, and then you accept others. That is the cycle of grace, if you will. So now we've got some definition to work with. Just let's make it personal. Let's talk about the real world and the lives that we live. Think about this. May grace be the arms that enfold you. Grace be the care that blankets you. Grace be the friends that hold you. Grace be the river that carries you. Near to the heartbeat of God, may you all rest each weary bone. After this journey you've trod, pray grace never leaves you alone. She's a mysterious woman indeed, poured out for those who can't earn, somehow always able to feed hearts that forever for her yearn. A little different way of thinking about grace. So often we put grace as a transactional commodity and we say, what will we do to earn grace? And we live our lives that way. We live our lives that way to our own detriment because grace cannot be earned. And that transformational gift turns into a transactional commodity and then it becomes limited. And then the song is not amazing grace, how sweet the sound. It is limited grace, how odd the sound that somehow just saved me. I know not how my soul was found to deserve it more than thee, but I've got it. Unfortunately, the last verse of that song is, if heaven seems too small a place, you might want to explore what universal good is grace, if not offered to more. So, I can't earn grace. So let's hear you all say that. I can't earn grace. Now you've said it. So if the question is not what will you do to earn grace, the question for a transformational gift is what will you do with grace? What are you going to do with it? You've already got it. You didn't earn it, but you got it. So what are you going to do with it? We can accept it, but we can also reflect it. And that is what I want to talk with you about today. How it is that we reflect grace. I want to go through very quickly just a very few of the ways that the people in this congregation through the years, and I'm not going back that far, we're not going back 200 years today, just a few years, have reflected grace in the choices they have made and in the things that they have chosen to do over the years. Let's talk about 1983 with FP and all those CCCCCs. Who knows what that means? First Presbyterian Church Child Care Center. Reflecting Grace. Same year, looks like Good Samaritan was started. And we participate in that and have for years, and have members of our congregation who reflect grace on our behalf at Good Samaritan. 1997 just happens to be a year I picked out of the blue because it happens to be one of the times when the youth in this church started to lead the way in mission on mission trips. And it started out by going to Mountaintop over in East Tennessee for a number of years. And then around 97 was when we first went to Pine Ridge, South Dakota. And after that, it was Bayou Batre, Alabama. And it was Marvell, Arkansas. And it was Savannah, Georgia. And then after Katrina hit in 2005 and 2006, it was Long Beach, Mississippi for a number of years where we chose to go and reflect grace with youth and adults in mission together, trying to help people put their lives back together. In 1998, the session looked out into the world and said, we've got resources, we've got space. What can we do to reflect grace? That's not exactly what they said, but that's what they meant. What can we do to reflect grace in this community? And they created the Program Design Committee. Y'all remember that group? It later became the Building Committee. And then this place was built, and that wing, and the kitchen, and the hospitality room, and the offices were remodeled, and all of that thing. And all of those were ways that we reflect grace because we found ways to use that. Because after about a year of this part of the building being pretty much vacant day after day during the week, we decided not to form the National Basketball Association, but the Neighborhood Basketball Association, and invited guys to come in here and girls to come in and play basketball a couple of days during the week, and we're still trying to do that, to reach out to the community. And we also host indoor soccer and junior pro basketball and civic and school and other nonprofit banquets and training events and all sorts of things reflecting grace out beyond our walls into the community. And then I believe it was about 2006 when Cafe 2535 started with feeding at the Glegren Center as the part of the Housing Authority's summer program. And we still participate in that and found a way, even though that program is not going on this year, to still participate with the police department in the program that they have going on this summer. And then in 2007, while we started that old Living Water stuff, Bob, David, Cindy, y'all know about that. They just got back from another trip. Just so happens that this system that's in the picture there is no longer installed in that location, but last summer it was reinstalled in a hospital not too far away from this location. And so grace is being reflected in ways far away from home by this congregation. In 2007, this little gathering right here, what we call Touch Point, was offered and risked by this congregation. And also in 2007, we also put this room to use on a Saturday in November and have been ever since then with 10,000 villages where artisans across the world in 30 different countries can sell their crafts, and the money actually goes directly back to the artisans so that they can provide shelter and food and education and clothing for their families. And the list just goes on and on. There is Angel Tree and Operation Christmas Child Shoebox Project and the utility bill assistance that we do during the winter months, and the Helping Hands ministry of this congregation to provide food for those among us who are facing some sort of difficulty, and our work with Monroe Harding that has been going on through the years, and the equal exchange of fairly traded coffee that we use. You see, it just keeps going on and on, all of the ways that we seek to reflect grace. And that's just a handful. That's just touching the tip of the iceberg of all the things that have gone on in the life of this congregation. And there are many other congregations that participate in some ways with us and by us in many of those things. So the list goes on and on of the ways that we reflect grace, the grace that is apportioned or measured to us in abundance. And I would charge you this morning to keep accepting, but also to keep reflecting that grace and find new ways to do that, not just congregationally and community-wide, but in your own lives and in the relationships that you have at work and at home and in the neighborhood and in social settings. So many different ways that we can reflect that grace, because it is measured to us without measure, you might say. It is poured out and overflowing in God's abundance to us.